feedback coupling between them. There's a mechanical coupling, and nobody can fully explain to this day how the system works. Probably Tesla could easily, unless somebody in the secret elements of the government, the various secret communities, have figured it out. At a certain point, the motor and generator system lock together. You can hear it wind up, and then it goes and locks into something, and nobody knows what it is, but you come out of the toothed wheel, which is on the back of the generator. A series of generating systems involving toothed wheels and magnetic coil pickups. The basic stable frequencies for the ILS system, 90 hertz, 150 hertz, divide down to 30, and a couple of other frequencies, including, I believe, 1 kilohertz. These things, these frequencies, are an absolute phase lock from every system that exists around the planet, no matter where it's physically located. And there's no electrical connection between the physical location of one transmitter to the next transmitter. They're locked to what is called the zero-time reference of the entire galaxy. And how Tesla figured that one out, nobody knows. But it works. And the FAA hasn't asked questions since, except the one time when I was working for one of the manufacturers. This was in 1969 in Kansas City, Missouri. We were manufacturing ILS ground transmitter systems for for the FAA. I looked at the schematics, I saw this thing, and I said to my bosses, in this day and age, why are they using a mechanical monstrosity like this to generate the primary frequencies? I says, why can't they use more modern electronics? He says, I've asked the same question. He says, I went back to the FAA and asked them. And they told me, quote, don't ask questions, just build it, unquote. So, there are some hidden engineering aspects of things which you don't get answers to.
Okay, so that was in the
that
room
was
where
part
you
of
were.
the system, and it's very important for this
Right.
reason, that it provided the reference so that actually they didn't anticipate it, but when the Eldridge were to move in space-time, would have a reference in order to come back to the same starting point.
Right.
And this is, of course, what eventually was responsible for the Eldridge, after it went into hyperspace, coming back. That piece of equipment had to be kept intact, and was not something we used an axe on. Other pieces of equipment, yes, but not that one.
Yeah, without that, you wouldn't know where to go back, right?
Right, the ship wouldn't know where to go back. None of the electrical systems, none of the collapsing fields would have a reference. Mm-hmm. And the ship would have no reference. It could reappear anywheres.
Anywheres meaning
Anywheres,
any time?
Any time, any physical location.
Any dimension?
Any dimension, anything. That was one of the key elements involved with this, and one of the strange aspects I'll get into later, mm-hmm. of why the Eldridge locked up with the Montauk project is also involved with that particular key piece of equipment, the zero-time reference generator. That was key to a lot of problems as well as solutions. But in any case, that was part of the equipment that was buried down there. There were racks of equipment. There were the two huge generators. They had to be synchronized, and they couldn't do this mechanically. And there was another man brought in who was in the Navy at the time, but apparently an electrical engineering expert. He designed a system to electrically synchronize the two generators so that there would be an exact phase relationship to each other, so that the 5 coils in one and the 5 coils in the other would produce the appropriate frequencies totally phase locked to each other, so you didn't have any drifting phase between two sets of coils and the other two sets of coils. So that was another major element. There's a lot of hardware that had to be all tied together and work together. And all of the modulating systems. I don't remember the details on most of those now. For the very large equipment, I do remember fairly well.
Did you oversee any of the actual building and installation of this equipment into the ship, or when you and Duncan arrived, had it already been assembled?
No, we saw it being installed in the Eldridge because we were there at the time that all of that was ongoing. That started in the... Actually, it was about January of '43 when it started, and we were a major part of the project then. And when it came to installing the equipment on the earlier sabotage test in the battleship, no, we did not see the installation. It was all there when we arrived.
So beside Dr. Van Neumann and Oscar Schneider, were there any interesting characters assigned to this project that you know about?
Can't say really that there were, other than the one RF expert.
Now, had Albert Einstein kind of moved away from this after the failed test?
Well, he was never directly involved with the engineering of this test and of the equipment.
He was
a consultant.
Okay.
And he was involved in the theory. He was concerned with some of the hardware, which was carried daily on board and off the ship. There's a certain key piece of equipment. I'm not sure now what that was. There is actually a photo of that somewhere in the archives. But he was concerned that certain aspects of it were carried out according to his wishes.
Did you ever meet him, Albert Einstein?
I think I met him once. It was when he was reviewing perhaps the key personnel working on board the ship at that time for that project. Mm-hmm. But he seldom got that involved in it. He was more an internal consultant to about a dozen projects ongoing at the Institute at that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I guess we're right now at that point where they're ready to conduct the test.
Right.
With the Eldridge.
Right. They picked half of the crew plus some officers. There was a skeleton crew on board the ship because they weren't going out in the ocean. They were just going down river, if you will. And about 6 miles down from the Navy Yard itself, adjacent to one of the islands called Tinicum Island, they theoretically dropped anchor. They did not drop anchor, but that was where they decided to become stationary in order to conduct the tests. They had one observer ship. There was an aircraft carrier. There was an officer in charge of these tests, a man by the name of Captain Harrison, who I learned all about again through his son much later in the 80s and the 90s in Los Angeles. But he was in charge of the test in terms of the Navy's interests. Van Neumann, of course, represented the Institute and the technical interests.
So you're saying that there was an aircraft carrier that observed this test?
Yes, it was used as a small carrier, not a full-size one. Mm-hmm. They had some smaller ones.
And do you remember the name of that aircraft carrier?
No, I do not. I may have it in my notes, but I don't recall it now. But in any case, they were adjacent to the ship to observe the invisibility effect. They had sailors stationed on the deck of the Eldridge to literally observe what they saw and what happened as the fields built up and as the experiment was underway.
So when the Eldridge was out there, you said it was a couple miles downriver?
It was 6 miles downriver from the Navy Yard.
Did you actually pull the trigger to start the test?
Yes, you control. I literally pull the triggers, pull the handles, if you will.
You control the whole thing. Did you receive an order?
Yes, you got an order by radio to start with the tests. Mm-hmm. Of course, the generators were already winding up. Well, they already were wound up because it took about 10 minutes to get those up to speed.
About how many men were on board ship at this time?
My recollection is 30 to 33.
Okay.
There were some who say there were more. But the special observer crew, about half of those were on deck, exposed literally to all of the radiation. Because you had 4 coils on deck, they were quite open. You had the antenna, special antenna on the top of the mast. They were within 75 feet, any and all of them, within 75 feet of any of the coils.
Was this like 15 people were on deck and the other 15 were below? How did that work out?
About, let's see, so I believe 12 on deck.
12 on deck and the rest below
were
deck?
Below deck, doing the various things you had to do to run the ship, keeping the power equipment running, doing the controls from the captain up in his helm to run the ship to control the power, etc., steering, etc.
And then you and Duncan there at the control panel.
And the control panel behind a steel bulkhead door in a special section which had been set aside for control of the equipment.
Mm-hmm. So you get the order to flip the switch, and then what happens?
Well, we turn up the drives because the generators were running, but they weren't being fed any power in the field coils to drive them. So we had to turn up the drives, which was electronic feeds, and gradually bring them up to speed. Then we had to bring up bring them up to the power level required. The generators were already up to speed. And then turn up the drives for the RF feeds for the antenna system. And our various meters told us that the two fields were functioning and doing their number of rotating within each other. And then we stayed inside and waited for our developments. There was a radio link to the outside world. And of course, in the initial one, the link we had was with the captain. On the second test, they gave us a link to the outside world, so we didn't know what was going on except what the captain told us. And we let him know that everything was functioning up to its normal levels. And then about 20 minutes later, we were told to shut the equipment down, because what the observers on the carrier saw was the ship went invisible, as it was supposed to. And all they could see is not even an outline of the ship, but there was an outline in the water of the bay, or the river, where the ship should have been, and it showed an outline for the size of the ship, except it was longer and wider, which said, A, the ship was there, and B, the fields were surrounding the ship, and because of the fields surrounding the ship, the water also became invisible, at least out to a certain point.
It seems odd that they were able to actually transmit a radio signal to you to shut the test down.
I don't know how they managed to do that, but they did.
Okay.
I didn't have any connection directly. I got it from the captain when to turn down. They couldn't do it visually because you couldn't see the ship. As far as I know from the inside, because of everything I read afterwards, you couldn't see anything beyond that because it was a gray fog.
Right. Do you remember any of the names of the captain or any of the sailors that were on board?
Only one of the sailors that I remember specifically, because there is a reason why I should remember him. And that guy was Bill Cody. He was a seaman. He had the rather distinction, if you will, that he used to engage in drinking bouts and could drink anyone under the table, including myself, which he did once. And it's rather embarrassing for an officer to get drunk under the table by a seaman, but it happened at some of the bar festivities downtown at the Blue Lagoon, which was the name of the bar that most of the sailors went to who were from that project. And the other people know. Only the captain in charge of the test, remember his name, Harrison. But after 20 minutes, we got the orders somehow to shut down. We did. We went back. Orders were also to return to the Navy Yard. We did, and then that's when they found out we had a sick crew. Those were on the deck. They were highly disturbed emotionally. They were disoriented physically.
But the ones below deck were fine, right?
The below deck, because of the steel shielding, were okay. In those days, the destroyers were built of steel. Now they're built of aluminum. So the steel was an excellent shielding against the magnetic fields, because they had a shield against both RF and magnetic. The magnetic fields alone could have given them severe problems.
So you're talking about the 12 people who were above deck?
They were
pretty sick.
They were very sick, disoriented, wandering around. They hadn't fallen into the deck, they hadn't disappeared or anything, but they were quite ill and nauseous. So
Vertigo.
the Navy, of course, picked them up and went into sick bay, and Van Neumann says, we'll need a new crew, and the Navy says, not to worry, we'll have a new crew for you. And then he said to the Navy official, he said, well, I've got to study this problem, find out what is going on here, what's wrong if these guys are sick. What can we do about it? Because obviously you can't have that if you're going to go across the ocean with one ship and one complete group after another. If you're going to have major commerce across the ocean with all the ships invisible, you can't have everybody getting sick. So he said he'd study the problem, and he said, I won't need time for this. The Navy didn't say anything at first.